Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, April the 21st, 2022. And starting off, Media Meltdown. This is a tweet from Fintwit Mini Planner. Woke Netflix stock crashes. Woke Disney stock plummeting. CNN Plus incinerates 100 million. Spotify cancels the Obamas. What is happening? It was something I read once about the arc of history. I don't believe any of that. I don't believe history has an arc. But supposedly it bends towards justice. And I think that is what we are looking at now. Let's look at stock price for the Walt Disney Company. Currently at $121.62. It was down almost $3 today, 2.3%. So, yeah, not looking so good, but let's take a broader picture. This is from David Eng at Breitbart. The Walt Disney Company is the worst performing stock in the Dow Jones Industrial Average for the past year, plummeting 31%. In the last 12 months. Of the 30 companies that comprise the Dow, Disney has seen its stock drop the most on a percentage basis, followed by 3M, which is down 25%, and Home Depot down 23%. Disney shares were down more than 5% Wednesday as investors remain skittish on streaming entertainment companies following Netflix's disastrous first quarter results. Disney Plus subscription results recently disappointed Wall Street when the company reported quarterly results in November, causing the stock to tumble. The Mouse House also faces difficulties in Florida, where the state Senate voted Wednesday to pass a measure that would deprive Disney World in Orlando of its self-governing status. The bill now moves to the Florida House, which I believe has voted in favor of this, which is expected to pass it and send it to the desk of Governor Ron DeSantis. Disney's free fall comes as the company has embraced woke far-left politics, specifically the exposure of young children to radical alphabet people ideology. In so doing, the entertainment giant has alienated millions of customers and picked a fight with Florida GOP leaders. Recently leaked internal videos show Disney executives and creative leaders openly advocating for promoting a gay and transgender agenda in the company's entertainment for young children. The leaks come shortly after Disney declared war on Florida's parental rights in education law, which bans the teaching of sexual and gender ideology to children in kindergarten through third grade. Disney CEO Bob Chapek caved to pressure from a small group of employees who demanded the company abandon its neutral position on the Florida legislation and fully embrace alphabet people activism. Let's look at CNN now. This is from the conservative Treehouse. Put this in the tracking file for ratios and such. Axios is reporting that CNN Plus is likely to collapse as Warner Brothers has suspended all external marketing and product development and fired the chief financial officer. The network has spent $300 million and garnered only 150,000 subscribers, a major fail by any major. Warner Brothers Discovery has suspended all external marketing spending for CNN Plus and has laid off CNN's longtime CFO as it weighs what to do with it. It is elsewhere being reported that Warner Brothers has decided that CNN Plus will be shuttered on April the 30th. Good news all around. Good news all around. So let's move on to Spotify. This is from Ariel Zilber at the New York Post. The Obamas are searching for a new home for their podcasts after Spotify reportedly declined to offer the former first couple a new contract because they didn't make enough personal appearances on the streaming service. Not as bad as the Markles. I think they're a little more diligent than Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Barack and Michelle Obama are reportedly in talks with several companies, including Amazon's Audible and iHeartMedia on a deal that will likely be worth tens of millions of dollars, according to Bloomberg News. The ex-president and the former first lady, who co-own the production company Higher Ground, will reportedly decide on their podcasting platform of choice sometime within the next few weeks. Higher Ground is said to be seeking an arrangement that would allow it to release shows on several platforms simultaneously. One of the sticking points in negotiations with Spotify was the Swedish company's insistence on an exclusive licensing deal. It had been reported, you may have seen this, 2 years ago or something, that Obama was set to become the first billionaire ex-president. And how does that happen? Well, I'll tell you how it happens. Ex post facto bribes. Obama could have hammered Wall Street for its many grievous sins, including nearly destroying the economy of the world when Obama became president in 2009. Instead, he decided to make Wall Street whole. And they proved to be quite grateful. But Barack Obama remains busy. He recently hosted a nature documentary about America, which I read somewhere had lions and tigers in it. Does Obama not know that there are not lions and tigers in America, except in zoos? This is from Wendell Huspo at Breitbart. Former President Obama will deliver a speech at Stanford University Thursday that embraces his new role of policing the national debate over whether social media companies should censor political opponents. Obama is expected to add his voice to demands for rules to rein in the flood of lies polluting public discourse, the New York Times reported. Since the New York Times was one of the major begetters of the Russiagate hoax, perhaps they will offer themselves up to be reined in. In private meetings and public appearances over the last year, the former president has waded deeply into the public fray over misinformation and disinformation, warning that the scourge of falsehoods. What is this? Am I reading from the Old Testament here or the New York Times? The scourge of falsehoods online has eroded the foundations of democracy at home and abroad. The Times noted it is not the first time Obama has delivered a speech on the topic. Last month, Obama spoke at an event organized by the University of Chicago and the Atlantic. Obama said during the speech, the social media companies should censor what, quote, we don't think are good for society. Like it is reasonable for us as a society to have a debate. Debate, huh? And then put in place a combination of regulatory measures and industry norms that can leave intact the opportunity for these platforms to make money, but to say to them that there's certain practices you engage in that we don't think are good for society, unquote. On Tuesday, Obama took to Twitter to suggest that censorship is needed to prevent real challenges to the Washington, D.C. establishment. In recent years, we've seen how quickly disinformation spreads, especially on social media. This has created real challenges for our democracy. Yes, democracy in Obama's definition, the elite definition, is we get to do whatever we want. We always win. Obama's new role of championing censorship, as dubbed by the Times, comes after Twitter censored Hunter Biden's laptop from hell story, while Facebook failed to suppress sketchily sourced or facially, I think that should be factually, unreliable stories, such as, say, the Steele dossier and endless articles based on it. I think that Obama said, a couple of weeks ago that, sure, free speech so long as people aren't mean. And I guess that's Obama's new role, to remind the world that mean people suck. So Elon Musk has weighed in on the media meltdown. This is from Heather Hamilton at the Washington Examiner. Netflix's video streaming service saw a historic drop in subscribers Tuesday, and Elon Musk said it was due to the, quote, woke mind virus, unquote, in the media. Netflix's video streaming service lost 200,000 subscribers between January and March, according to a quarterly report released Tuesday. The reported losses led to its stock dropping 25% in aftermarket trading, setting the stage for a loss of $42 billion in value Wednesday. The Tesla and SpaceX CEO replied to a Slashdot tweet about Netflix's loss, saying the woke mind virus is making Netflix unwatchable. Pranay Pathole, an artificial intelligence engineer, replied to Musk, saying that the woke mind virus is the biggest threat to civilization. Musk replied, yes. And let's talk about Jon Stewart, who is not happy these days. Apparently, he's not funny anymore. And people are asking the question, why isn't Jon Stewart funny anymore? He grew a beard. Well, perhaps not the sole reason he's not funny anymore. I thought on The Daily Show, he was occasionally funny. I thought he was quite funny on the Larry Sanders show. But like David Letterman, he decided to grow a beard to let the world know that he is a serious man, a very serious man indeed. This is Devin Gordon at The Atlantic. What happened to Jon Stewart? He is comedy royalty, but the world has changed since he was at the height of his powers. In March 2021, shortly after Jon Stewart joined Twitter, he tapped the microphone and used his new pulpit to make amends for an infamous act of aggression from his distant past. I called Tucker Carlson a dick on national television, Stewart tweeted. It's high time I apologize to dicks. Never should have lumped you in with that terrible, terrible person. Stewart originally fired this shot 17 years ago on October 15, 2004. But if you're old enough, you surely remember what happened, in part because it was one of the first truly viral political videos of the century. Stewart was a guest on Tucker Carlson's cacophonous CNN political argument show, Crossfire, a half-hour nightly migraine of debate club doublespeak, during which Stewart pleaded with Carlson to stop hurting America. Wait, I thought you were going to be funny, Tucker sniffed. No, Stewart shot back. I'm not going to be your monkey. Soon enough, he was calling Tucker a dick on national television. You're as big a dick on your show, he said, as you are on any show. And then he talks about Stewart's failure, his failed talk show, MTV, various failures, and some regrettable movie choices before he took over The Daily Show. The gist of this story is, well, who's laughing now? Jon Stewart or Tucker Carlson? Well, it's obviously Tucker Carlson, who seems to be having a whale of a time on his Fox show. But Jon Stewart is back with, guess what? Another streaming show. And it's not turning out well. Not turning out well at all. Nobody wants to watch because Jon Stewart has a beard now and is just so very serious. Of course, it would be my guess that Jon Stewart's black audience on The Daily Show was, well, negligible. And then on his new show, where he basically says that white people are scum and they've always been scum and they always will be scum. This is what they call, I think, a disincentive for white people actually watching Stewart's new show on Apple TV Plus, which is called The Problem with Jon Stewart, which sounded a lot like The Daily Show, only longer and less funny. And instead of 4 episodes a week, Stewart was going to deliver just 8 episodes per season. Each episode would follow a 3-act format: opening monologue, expert roundtable, sit-down interview with someone powerful, the chair of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Veterans Affairs Secretary, the CEO of Shell. If The Daily Show was a parody of a nightly news show, though, the problem often feels like a defanged real-time with Bill Maher. Yes, so very, very serious is Jon Stewart. And I have to say that somehow identifying himself personally with the first responders of 9/11 and, showing up to Congress to demand that people be paid benefits, well, forever. And question of, were people actually there, et cetera, et cetera? No. People who claim benefits and say 9/11 should get them forever. And in more Jon Stewart news, he is not happy with John Nolte of Breitbart. Nolte writes, Jon Stewart, a former comedian most famous for playing himself on the Larry Sanders Show, seems a bit unfair, suffered a Twitter meltdown Wednesday over a Breitbart News report about his ratings or lack thereof. On Tuesday, Breitbart News reported that Jon Stewart's new streaming show, The Problem with Jon Stewart, is a flop, with just 40,000 viewers out of 20 million Apple TV subscribers. The day following our published report, the multimillionaire freaked out. But as you will see in the embedded tweets below, he did not dispute the numbers. Holy shit, he tweeted. Just think how bad it'll get in season 2. And they upped our episode order. What the F? And they kept going. Also, Get Woke, Go Broke is a great reminder to all creative content types. Always let the market dictate what you say and how you feel. And right now, Trolley Edgelord is hot with a lot of O's and a lot of T's and 4 exclamation points. Also, Breitbart's Nolte seems like one of the most genuine, unpleasant, creepy weirdos on the net, which given the competition is actually quite impressive. So kudos. So check out the show, The Problem. We're very proud of it. 3 exclamation points. That's all for now, as I'm late for an 11 a.m. ball tanning. That's a reference to Tucker Carlson, of course. Look forward to all the Leibowitz references in the comments. Yeah, it's not good when you decide to engage in a hysterical tweet storm against someone from Breitbart. I think that the crux of his complaint against Tucker Carlson on Crossfire was phony and hypocritical. That, yes, it is entertainment. Jon Stewart on The Daily Show, something news, something important, something, why is this happening? And then he makes a face and goes, arr! Yeah. No, he didn't dumb down things at all. No. I remember one episode after John Rocker had been profiled in Sports Illustrated. Note, if you are in sports, do not agree to a feature story on you by Sports Illustrated unless you are, Naomi or one of the Williams sisters or whatever. It's not going to be pleasant. John Rocker was a relief pitcher for the Atlanta Braves, and he'd made some spicy comments about riding the number 7 train to Shea Stadium in New York City. And so, let's see, Stewart was talking about this at his end of week show, and he was encouraging the audience, ginning up the audience to howl for John Rocker's blood. If Rocker had appeared on the stage, or he would have been torn to pieces. But that's because, Jon Stewart's always been about, uniting and not dividing. As for Netflix, I'm rather surprised that this didn't happen earlier. Netflix's business plan, throw billions and billions of dollars. When are we going to make money? Eventually. How are we going to make money? Everyone on planet Earth is going to have 2 separate Netflix subscriptions. It's like Justin Trudeau once said that deficits they balance themselves. He seemed to believe that. And I suppose he still believes it. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Brian Frakes. That's a new one to me. He says Lamprey Milk sent me, and that's his problem. Hello to Oscar Toe. What's next? Requiring a license to make toast in your toaster. Hello to Ann Run. Chogakin666 says, and then one day I learned to despise the ho-ho. Little William Hicks, Picasso88. Chogakin666 says, you must apply at the toast office. Hello to Dan Allison. Oscar Toe. Picasso88. Buddy says, Kevin, good evening from sunny and cool Midwest USA. Let's play 2. Permission to blast? Yes, of course. Hello to Head McNeck. Every comment we make on all social media needs to be, where is Gonzalo Lira, until we get an answer. William Hicks says a license as well as various and sundry release forms, affidavits, and whatnot. Dan Allison says it's not enough. I'm a Floridian and I want those pervs out of my state. Buddy asked, doesn't or didn't Gonzalo have a family? I don't know. Oscar Toe says they call it the Mouse House. Well, Variety and other entertainment publications do. Other people call it the Devil Mouse, such like. Look, Dr. Dead Name. Pelpcasco 88 says saw that Gonzalo is safe in Belarus. Not sure if true. Ed McNeck says yes, and his family in Chile is making a lot of noise. Jokin 666 says Russian special forces are searching for him via RF Ministry of Defense. Okay, who else do we have? Lancaster is awesome, says Ed McNeck. Is that a movie? Oh, Pat Lancaster. Oh, I'm not familiar with him. Oh, Lancaster is always so terrified when the shooting starts, but he never runs. He's brave, says Ed McNeck. Oh, yes, you heard about that supposed expert on intelligence, an ex-soldier who was photographed in full combat gear in Ukraine. In the rear with the gear, I'm told. Oscar Toe says we need to make Sam hide our journalists and send him amongst their journalists. Andy Agner says, so where is Tiffany Dover? Mariupol captured, said Shogokin 666. Kevin Elisha Cuthbert rating, she's Canadian, Elisha Cuthbert, I think I know who she is. Let me just check. Good looking, blonde. Is that the one? Yes, from Calgary. Okay. Oh, she's considered a sex symbol. And in 2013, Maxim magazine rated her TV's most beautiful woman. I don't know that I would go that far. I was confusing her with that movie actress who was the Scientologist. And I once joked that, yeah, sure, I'd make a 5 billion year marriage contract with that particular woman. Who, another Elisha, something like that. Remember the miniseries about Jesus and the devil looked just like Obama, says Oscar Toe. Okay. She was really cute, but her character was the worst thing about 24. Very annoying, says Palpcasso 88. I watched the first season of Palpcasso 88, and every episode she was on, I found myself thinking, why hasn't anyone killed her yet? Okay. See, anyone? Jon Stewart is like an old Nick Fuentes, says Oscar Toe. Wasn't Tucker a big neocon back then? Well, kind of, sort of, I suppose. He wrote that famous Talk magazine profile of George W. Bush, which just eviscerated him, talking about a woman on death row in Texas. I can't remember the woman's name. And Tucker Carlson asked, well, you weren't interested in speaking to her? And Bush said, on the record, oh, what is she going to say? Please don't kill me. And I thought, this is a bad man. I'm in favor of the death penalty. But as you know, for people to be executed in American states, the governor must sign a death certificate. I have never signed, execution warrant, rather. I have never signed an execution warrant, and I think that that would sober anyone up, but not in W's case. I knew Winona Ryder's career was in big trouble when they gave her Stewart as a boyfriend in that Larry Sanders show. That was a very funny episode. What Larry Sanders, what was the band that had the one big hit? The singer had very short hair and a goatee and jumped around on stage, and Larry was pretending to be, down with the young people. So he went to a rehearsal to show Winona Ryder that he was down with the young people, and then he found Jon Stewart and Winona Ryder canoodling, and of course that happened to Larry a lot. Hello to Seven Costanza. And let's get back to it here. And I am now going to talk about, here we go. The Power of No. This is from Frank Wright, who has his own Substack, which you should check out. And he appears regularly in The Conservative Woman, which is at Conservative Woman Co. UK. I would prefer not to, the 5 words that will identify you as saying. In Herman Melville's short story, Bartleby the Scrivener, it's about an office boy who spent his days staring at a brick wall. When asked to work, to vacate the office, to get off the staircase, to cease sleeping in the doorway at night, he famously replies, I would prefer not to. He dies in the end, preferring not to eat. Bartleby, though something of an extremist, nevertheless has a solid lesson to impart to us all. He is a symbol of the power of speech, which can make an obstacle of a person when intentionally used as an instrument of sabotage or control. We are all compelled at times to acknowledge the madness of the world. We know well that there are penalties socially and professionally for failing to celebrate the latest act of vandalism upon reason. Wright continues, pronouns and their increasing use among people who send emails for a living is one minor example. Others include the zealotic worship of criminals, frenzied attacks on statues, clapping a service which won't help you and whose interjections are the most common cause of medical coincidence in history. Oh, and economic suicide for the most corrupt country in the Northern Hemisphere. How are we to answer these humorless jokes, which sound like the commandments of a lunatic? What I like to call the Sarvodaya of the West is simply politely refusing to cooperate. Conservatives which wish most of all to be left alone, yet regardless of whether you are interested in this madness, it is interested in you. That, of course, is a famous reference to Trotsky. It wants to catch you out so it can point to you, sneer at you, display you as a figure of derision, and justify paying you less or not at all. It is a corrupt thematic impulse, which means it is a perverse need to be noticed that is on display. The clapper, the mask worn in the park, the smug email signature, the yellow and blue flag avatars of the Twitter Ukrainus. These are all gambits for the right kind of attention. The wrong one is reserved for you. Wright continues, the more your morale is undermined, the more you can be convinced these people have the right to ruin your life. You don't deserve to be called a woman or to have any respect as a man. Your children have no right to go to a school where English is the first language. Why shouldn't you pay higher taxes on everything to change the weather, the government in Russia, to fund the third worldization of your homeland? These things all matter, and we cannot simply ask to be left alone. What can be done? Do not immediately cooperate. Have your answer ready. It is perfectly acceptable for the godless, antidepressant-addled, and mentally shambolic to remind you how they are not religious. Why not become woke agnostic then? I don't believe in that is a fair answer to any of the deranged totems of the regime. Why don't you put pronouns in your signature? I would prefer not to. Ditto all the catchphrase crazes, which all want you humbled on your knees. Of course, these manufactured fevers are catching to the credulous, but the solution is not to pretend to be infected. The antidote is manners. Manners are more important than laws, and their decline is the decline of our civilization. Manners are the practice of self-government in personal matters. Laws threaten punishment and are therefore to do with compulsion. Manners are voluntary. The line between those who can and will behave well when unsupervised and those who must see the whip hand could be drawn by manners. The way to make these things starve to death, like Bartleby, is to deprive them of the drama they require to command attention. Raise an eyebrow as you said. I would prefer not to. And Frank Wright concludes, it is exceedingly impolite to compel people to agreement against their will by force of circumstance. If you would not in your private life entertain wacky ideas, then you ought not to feel obliged to do so in company. Avoid offense giving by remaining cordial, and perhaps a wry smile might help indicate the mood. These are silly things which have all got out of hand, and their most ardent fans are children of all ages. Be firm but fair. In a choice between the devil and the deep blue hair, choose neither. And again, that's an essay from Frank Wright at the website, The Conservative Woman, Conservative Woman Co. UK, one that I recommend highly. And if you listen to this live stream, you will remember that I cite it often. And now, speaking of antidepressants, I remember writing a piece on the pharmaceutical industry for Chronicles magazine in 2006, where I came across something interesting, which is to say that studies had held that antidepressants don't work. That is to say that they are no more valuable than St. John's wort or a placebo. But of course, so many people take antidepressants. And some years ago, I came up with a unified field theory for the corruption of our intelligentsia, or elite more generally, which is the use of antidepressants and other drugs which fog the brain. As far as I can tell, antidepressants are supposed to work by robbing people of higher cognition. Now, it's famously true that really stupid people never get depressed because they don't have the mental faculties to consider the state of the world, say, or their own position within the world at all. This is Joe Davis at the Daily Mail. Antidepressants are no better at making people feel happier than taking no medication at all, a study claimed today. Patients on the drug did not have a significantly better quality of life compared to depressed people who were not on the pills. Researchers looked at 17.5 million U.S. adults with depression over 10 years, with around half on medication and half not. Results showed a slight improvement in mental health in both groups, regardless of whether they were on antidepressants. The researchers from King Saud University called for more long-term studies on patients on antidepressants to evaluate their impact on quality of life. National Health Service doctors are already moving away from prescribing the drugs, which can cause a host of side effects. Yes, one of the most common being what doctors have prettily dubbed suicidal ideation, meaning you spend a lot of time thinking about wanting to kill yourself. And a considerable number of people on antidepressants kill themselves because their brain, which gave them trouble, has been turned into cotton wool, and they don't like that. The health service now advises that patients with mild depression be offered group therapy sessions before pills. But independent experts said strong conclusions from the study cannot be drawn between those given the drugs who were typically more depressed at the start, and therefore it was not a fair comparison. They insisted other clinical studies have shown the drugs to improve overall quality of life. Yes, I can hear the pharmaceutical industry behind this. About 3.7 million adults, 17% of the adult population, took antidepressants in England from 2017 to 2018. The latest data is available for. Some of the most commonly prescribed are citalopram, sertraline, and fluoxetine under the brand names Celexa, Zoloft, and Prozac. Some 27.6 million over 18s, that's 13.2%, were taking the drugs regularly in the United States between 2015 and 2018, according to the Centers for Disease Control. You know, these days, it's difficult to know whether one is talking to a sober person. That is to say, whether one is talking to a person whose minds are not deeply affected by the use of drugs. I mean, one of the reasons that alcohol is better than such drugs is because you wake up in the morning and the alcohol no longer has an effect. Well, not in changing your mood. You might have a hangover, but then you get over the hangover. You are not constantly under the grip of this drug. As the song has it, the drugs don't work. Let's go to Ace of Spades. Stephen Colbert has COVID. Golly, there's a shocker. So thankful he is vaccinated and double boosted, because that theoretically kept him from getting an even worse COVID infection, one hypothesizes. All of these famous people who are, triple jabbed or more keep coming down with COVID. But just remember how efficacious COVID is, because the drug companies wouldn't lie to us, would they? Our politicians, the elites, media, they wouldn't lie to us, would they? Oh, let's hear from John Ekdahl, thought leader. And his Twitter account is called Ekdahl Press Office. Just 2 days ago, former President Obama warned us about the spread of disinformation and the danger it poses to our precious democracy. It is a credit to his enduring legacy and continued influence that his efforts in fighting this scourge have so quickly resulted in the shuttering of CNN Plus while it was still celebrating its massively successful launch. I'm looking forward to former President Obama's continued leadership on this issue, with many more newsroom closures to come. And Ace says, I want my own press office. I want to issue formal statements too. Let's hear from prominent American conservative David A. French, who of course believes that Drag Queen Story Hour is one of the blessings of American liberty. He tweets, "It's time to stop using the word conservative to broadly describe the right or the Republican Party. It fits some individuals, and I'll use it then, but it increasingly doesn't fit the institution. It definitely doesn't fit much of the right." Good, good, good. Wow, this is really white pill Thursday here. Of course, I will remind you again that David A. French describes himself as a classical liberal, which is at the antipodes to conservatism, or it used to be. And I have more on that. Someone called Jenna Ellis, another conservative Inc. Worthy, America's Lawyer, contributor to Newsmax, The Jenna Ellis Show, senior counsel, the Thomas More Society. She was agreeing with Charles C.W. Cook of National Review. Why anyone, he's British, he's translated to America. He quickly adopted American naming convention, Charles C.W. Cook. Sounds classy, right? And he was ranting against Ron DeSantis, who apparently is a socialist, and he's doing what we say our enemies do. Yeah, it's funny how that works. Jenna Ellis had tweeted, "As much as I disagree with Disney's corporate statement, they have a right to speak and support or not legislation without government consequences. Their customers have a right to react with their dollars. DeSantis is over the line here." To which I responded, "So-called conservatives will fight to the death to preserve the privileges of mega corporations that groom your children. They are busily engaged in heaping up the funeral pyres of their nation's moral. Don't be conservative." Jerry Dean responded, "Yep, if left-wing Disney execs want to play politics, they should get blowback. By the way, Disney ABC censors conservatives and would censor Ellis if they could, but she loves them no matter what. Conservative equals loser." Yes, it does. I mean, there are some people like David A. French and Jenna Ellis who get paid for this charade. Certainly everyone who is not paid or has no reasonable expectation of being paid should just drop this lark. An interesting piece from Bruce Bauer at American Greatness called Paul Auster, Man in the Dark. "I am on record as being an admirer of the fiction of Paul Auster, author of such novels as The Book of Illusions and Man in the Dark. In 1989, he gave his novel Moon Palace a rave review in the New Criterion. In 1990, I enthused over The Music for Chance in the Wall Street Journal. And in 1992, again in the New Criterion, I praised Leviathan. Auster, I argued repeatedly, was one of the most impressive living American novelists, a brilliantly original talent. It's been a while since those reviews, but my admiration for Auster's work hasn't faded." So when I saw his name in a newspaper headline the other day, I was quick to click on the story, and what a story it was. Daniel Auster, the novelist's 44-year-old son by his first wife, the writer Lydia Davis, had just been charged with manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide in the death last November of his 10-month-old daughter, Ruby. According to a Brooklyn prosecutor, the baby had ingested enough heroin and fentanyl to render an adult unconscious. Her father, who'd been taking care of her in their Park Slope home while the baby's mother was at work, had been doing heroin earlier in the day and kept glassine packets of heroin in his bathroom. When contacted by the New York Post, Paul Auster had no comment. Simply put, this terrible story renewed my interest in Auster, and I went online to catch up with him. I found a 2016 interview with the BBC whose reporter met him at his home on a gentrified street in Brooklyn, which had immaculately placed sitting room furniture. Auster, the reporter noted, had called right-wing Republicans jihadists and complained that Barack Obama was too moderate. Now, with the 2016 election imminent, Auster testified that, quote, most people I know are on the verge of a nervous breakdown, unquote. Why? Trump, of course. When Trump says make America great again, Auster declared he means make America white again. Asked if Trump's voters were racist, Auster said yes. 10 years ago, Auster lamented, there had been 60 so-called white supremacist groups. Now there are 900. 900? Where did he get that number? Trump has enabled them. Oh, and Trump was also anti-Semitic. Quote, there are times when Trump does sound like Hitler. The international banking conspiracy is just a code word for Jews. It's very scary. I'm scared out of my wits, unquote. Bauer comments, needless to say, there was nothing surprising about these accusations. I'd seen them 1,000 times. They were the baseless, unhinged left-wing talking points of the day, and parroting them had quickly solidified into an obligatory ritual for any member of the cultural elite who wanted to stay in the cultural elite. Still, it was depressing to see Auster playing the game. Was he reciting this leftist mantra out of foolishness or cowardice? After all, Auster, who at the time was pushing 70, had lived in the New York area most of his life, and Trump had long been a New York fixture. He was constantly in the media. He'd won awards from Jewish and Black groups. He had countless celebrity friends and was a particular favor of rappers. His daughter married a Jew and gave him Jewish grandchildren. Did Auster seriously believe that Trump had become a racist and anti-Semite of the first water? If so, at what point had he undergone that extraordinary metamorphosis? And what about Auster's claim that half the people in America were ideologically indistinguishable from Nazis and KKK members? Did Auster, who is Jewish, really believe that? If so, how could he bring himself to step outside his home, let alone fly to red state cities to promote his books? I think this is part and parcel of moving to Brooklyn, frankly. You move to Brooklyn, Park Slope, or some other place, and then one day you wake up and, yes, Americans, they're disgusting racists. They don't wear hoods anymore, but they'd like to. And then you talk to your other Brooklyn friends and you think, it's nice to live in a place where everyone agrees with me. We are the best people on earth. Only we were running things. Well, actually, they are running things. And I suppose that's why they became so unhinged when Trump won in 2016 against what, the most experienced presidential candidate in history? Is that what they were calling Hillary? Democracy means the good guys, as defined by them, always win. And Bauer continues, on the day of Trump's inauguration, The Guardian published an interview with him. It was more of the same. Quote, Trump's election is appalling. I've been struggling to work out how to live my life in the years ahead, unquote. Auster also made a point of saying his wife, novelist Siri Hustvedt, was an ardent feminist, and that I agree with her in all her positions. How, I wondered, as I read this nonsense, could such a brilliantly original novelist have such dumb derivative politics? And what on BBC, March 2017, Auster called Trump deranged, demented, incompetent, unqualified. Asked whether his reaction to Trump was a class thing, Auster admitted might be in part, but then he deflected, charging that Trump has a demonic talent for inciting crowds by spouting gibberish, utter nonsense. Trump, he asserted, wants to dismantle American society. Asked if this was alarmism, Auster replied, you never know what he thinks. I don't think he even knows what he thinks. And more on the same, During that interview, Auster and Hustvedt sat in their Brooklyn home, well-dressed, holding forth on literary and political matters and on the pandemic. They seemed terribly self-important, greatly impressed with themselves, eager and unembarrassed to go on at length about their writing processes, the narratives in their novels, the characters whom they conjure up in their imaginations and shape stories around. On the day of that interview, a very real person named Ruby would have been about 4 months old, lying in a crib in an apartment not far from Paul and Siri's home, being taken care of, at least part of the time, by a heroin addict. How often did Auster see his granddaughter? He had worried endlessly, he maintained, about Trump, although he and Siri seemed supremely happy and serene throughout the Zoom interview. We were supposed to believe at the same time that he felt that he was living in a nightmare because of Trump. Did he ever worry about Ruby? Did it ever occur to him that she was the one really living in a nightmare? For that matter, how much did he worry about Daniel? A quick Google search turned up these sentences about Daniel in a 2014 New Yorker profile of his mother. Quote, as a teenager, he started going to clubs in New York City and became deeply involved with drugs. In 1996, when he was 18, he was present in the apartment when a dealer named Andre Melendez was murdered by Michael Allig, a former club promoter, and his roommate, Robert Riggs. Auster was given $3,000 of Melendez's money in exchange for his silence and later pleaded guilty to possession of stolen property and served a 5-year probation. Unquote. I'm not going to go into the details of Michael Alec, the infamous club boy, and his circle and what they got up to. You can find it easily enough on Wikipedia. It is absolutely depraved. One would think that if you found out that your son was involved with Michael Alec in any capacity, and given the means, you would stage what do they call it? An intervention. Bauer avers that I'm not suggesting that Paul Auster should be blamed entirely for what happened to his son. Still, one can't help wondering where was he when, as a teenager, Daniel was going to clubs in New York City and becoming deeply involved in drugs. Once again, kids, don't do drugs. Let's go to the Drudge Report to see if the world is at war. LA masking up again. What, really? Come on, what's happening there? Let's find out. LA County to order a return of masks on public transit, rideshare, and LAX despite federal rules. There is an illustration of an angry Mickey Mouse. Florida strips Disney, as previously mentioned. Now, Ukraine. It's fallen. No, it doesn't even appear. It doesn't even appear on the front page of Drudge. Perhaps people are bored with the world's greatest ever hero of Vladimir Zelensky. Could be happening. And again, that would be very good news. Let's check out the headlines at antiwar.com. Biden announces $1.3 billion more aid for Ukraine. You could pour that money down a rat hole for all the good that it would do. U.S. and allies escalate military aid to Ukraine. U.S. announces more sanctions on Russia. Yes, we heard this yesterday. U.S. has almost zero ability to track weapons it sends to Ukraine. Germany's Scholz under pressure to send heavy weapons to Ukraine. Does Germany have any weapons? I know that they, for all intents and purposes, don't have an air force anymore, the once mighty Luftwaffe. Russia now controls 80% of Luhansk region. Ukraine offers talks with Russia to evacuate from Mariupol. And, oh yes, speaking of the Ukraine and Russia, this is from Andrea Widberg at American Thinker. Tulsi Gabbard is a former Democrat Party member of the House of Representatives, a former presidential candidate, and a current lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve. She's too left on some things for me, but she's got a good head on her shoulders, lots of common sense, and a dislike for being used as cannon fodder for America's newly hawkish leftists and rhinos. Well, the rhinos were always hawkish, because she suggested that America should not rush into a shooting war with a nuclear Russia on behalf of the Ukraine. especially given revelations about biological labs in Ukraine. Mitt Romney and Keith Olbermann have called her a traitor. What's great is that Tulsi is pushing back by demanding an apology, or, if she does not receive one within a week, promising to sue. Tulsi's attorney is the brilliant and very successful Harmeet Dillon. On Wednesday, Dillon sent a cease and desist letter to both Romney and Olbermann. In a letter to Romney, Dillon details Tulsi's long record of active service in the U.S. military. She then spells out Romney's defamatory statement. Quote, on March 13, 2022, you tweeted the following: Tulsi Gabbard is parroting false Russian propaganda. Her treasonous lies may well cost lives. Your tweet had no surrounding context and was not part of a broader conversation. Your accusation that Representative Gabbard, a combat veteran and current military officer, is engaged in so-called treasonous activity is completely false, a fact of which you are well aware when you made your claim. And as explained below, your accusation that Representative Gabbard lied also has no basis in fact, unquote. Dillon's demand letter explains to Romney that defamation occurs when a person knowingly publishes a false and derogatory statement about another. When the defamatory statement falsely accuses someone of criminal activity, it's called defamation per se, which means that the plaintiff does not have to prove injury. It's assumed. Treason, of course, is one of the most slanderous statements one can make about anybody. After all, it's the only crime specifically defined in the Constitution itself. Quote, treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort, unquote. After warning Romney to preserve all relevant evidence, Dillon makes the demand: immediately cease and desist from making false statements and retract takedown of such statements you have made. Should Romney fail to comply within a week, Tulsi will sue. And please note that, this is my addition, it's not in Dillon's letter. Because Romney was not speaking on the floor of the Senate when he made these statements, he cannot claim immunity as a defense. Olbermann said on television they, that is to say Tucker Carlson and Tulsi, are Russian assets and there is a war. There's a case for detaining them militarily. Trials are a sign of good faith and patience on the part of democracy, unquote. Somewhere along the line, the award-winning Cornell-educated Olbermann missed the fact that America is not at war with Russia. What's also brilliant is the whole lawfare aspect of Tulsi's demand that she receive a complete apology, or that Romney and Olbermann must be prepared to appear in court. Leftists have managed to change America completely through lawfare. Meanwhile, for too long, conservatives have just kept trying to turn the other cheek. That must end. And Whitber concludes, the culture war in America demands that those who wish to stop the madness use American institutions, free speech, voting, and lawfare to push back hard. We're at the cliff's edge, and we either drive the left back so that we can stand again on firm ground, or we yield again and again, leading to America's inevitable free fall. Yes, I've always liked Surfer Mommy. Oh, here's a story about hubris. This is from Stephen Chase, an old colleague of mine at the Globe and Mail. Wife of jailed Russian human rights activist asked Canada and allies to press for his release. The wife of Russian human rights activist Vladimir Kara-Murza, who was jailed this month after a CNN interview in which he condemned Moscow's war on the Ukraine, is urging Canada and other Western countries to press the Kremlin to release him and other prisoners of conscience. Former Liberal Justice Minister Erwin Kotler, a perennial pest, that's my addition, echoed this call, saying he fears Russia is trying to silence a man who has emerged as a leading advocate for democracy and human rights in Russia and a leading critic of Moscow's external aggression. Since this invasion began, and before the invasion, the government of Canada has spewed poison at Russia. Now they're accusing Russia of war crimes and, genocide. Yeah, that's a pretty accurate way to talk about Russia is doing, said Justin Trudeau. Why would Russia do any favors for Canada? Let's see. Mr. Kara-Murza, 40, was arrested April 11th in Moscow after the broadcast of an interview in which he called Russian President Vladimir Putin's government a regime of murderers. He was immediately charged with disobeying police and sentenced to 15 days in prison. A former deputy leader of the People's Freedom Party, he currently lives in the United States. There's a shocker, but makes frequent trips to Russia, most recently in early April. And, oh, yes, let's hear from Garry Kasparov, former world chess champion, who for some reason is taken seriously on the question of foreign policy. This is from Business Insider's Cheryl Attet. Russian chess grandmaster and Putin critic Garry Kasparov has outlined the right conditions for Putin to be overthrown in a palace coup. Yes, I'm sure that Kasparov is au courant with exactly what is going on inside the Kremlin. And if Garry Kasparov glowed any more brightly in the dark, he would be visible from space. Of course, Garry Kasparov is not Russian. He is half Armenian and half Jewish. And after bad things were being done to Armenia after the breakup of the Soviet Union, particularly in Baku, he fled for safety. Guess what? To Russia, which took him in. Kasparov, despite being a cheater at chess, yes, he actually did, in a game against the women's world champion. The great dissident, strange that he's described as such, given that he was elected to the Central Committee of the Komsomol quite late in the day. Let's see, in 1987, I have tried for some time to find out for how long Kasparov served on the Central Committee of the Komsomol, which is the communist equivalent of Hitler Youth. But yes, where does Garry live? Garry lives all over the place. I believe he lives in New York, and he lives in Croatia, and he may have other abodes. I don't know how much money he made playing chess, but he hasn't played chess for quite some time. It would be interesting to learn the sources of his finances. And now we're going to let's see if the Moon of Alabama Twitter feed is still up, because as previously mentioned, any Twitter feed which has attempted to give any kind of a balanced viewpoint about what is going on in Ukraine, or even simply to present news that is not agitprop from Kyiv, is thrown off Twitter. For 14 hours ago, Putin has canceled the storming of the Azovstal complex. Putin tells Russian army to blockade Mariupol plant. He explained 3 days ago the Azovstal complex is a 2 by 2 miles industrial area. It can be surrounded and controlled by a relatively small force. Those within the area no longer have heavy artillery ammunition and presumably little other supplies. The Russian forces can see and bomb anything that moves on the open ground and can otherwise sit back and wait their enemies out. I do not believe that holding on to the Azovstal will significantly delay the upcoming second phase of the Russian operation, which will surround and destroy the Ukrainian army on the Donbass front. And see if there's any other sources that are available. Let's see if the RWA podcast Twitter feed has been allowed to exist on Twitter. I've been thinking for weeks now that it is going to be nuked, but no, wait, it's still up. Oh, and it updated. Let's see. Aslan is still proud of it. The greatest criticism, Putin is not in any way related to human rights or international law or anything like that. He's just mad that his robber baron buddies aren't in charge of Russia anymore. The irony, of course, is that is exactly the conditions created by Aslan and his friends that led to Vladimir Putin's ascent to power and many of his actions. with regard to this. Why did you help Jeffrey Sachs and Yeltsin reduce Russian male life expectancy by 10 years, execute the greatest robbery in history, and plunge tens of millions of people into misery? And what should be done to you? Oh, that's a very good question. Oh, yes. Russia has to be made capitalist real soon now, immediately. Isn't this going to mean the collapse of society with babushkas out in the street begging for kopecks? Yeah. You know, you can't make a free enterprise omelet without breaking, I don't know, a few million old ladies. Anders Asland, economist and author, Russia, Ukraine, and Eastern Europe. Read my latest book, Russia's Crony Capitalism. Of course, crony capitalism does not exist in the Ukraine, or the borderlands, as I like to call it. Aslan directly participated in the creation of the economic regime that has plagued and is still plaguing Russia. He was a sycophant to the oligarchs. He looted Russia and enriched himself off the suffering brought on by the shock therapy he and his fellow thieves introduced. The actions of the Yeltsin regime, loyal and propped up by the Americans, are directly responsible for the deaths of millions, and Anders Aslan personally participated in this. It's good to be reminded of, I suppose, what is ancient history. Now, despite all this, Putin came to power and he crushed the oligarchs. He looked for friendship with the West, friendship with the United States. But no, you can't have that for various reasons. It's a unipolar world now, you know, and also largely because of, let's say, ethnic resentments. Russian American Daily is still up, which is good news as well. And let's see whether Pedro Gonzalez has anything new. He is an editor at Chronicles Magazine, and his pieces appear in many other publications. He's working on something about Taylor Lorenz. Here we go. He has a piece in the Washington Times on this. Taylor Lorenz's war on normal people. Why are liberal journalists so upset at parents who want to protect their children? In mythology, harpies are a race of half-human, half-bird creatures with pale faces and long claws who descend on prey as fast as the blowing wind. In these disenchanted times, we have, instead of those shrill hybrids, the liberal journalist. A good example is found in Washington Post columnist Taylor Lorenz. She recently used data gathered by a far-left activist named Travis Brown, whose activities are subsidized by the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research to shred the privacy of an American citizen. On April 19th, Lorenz published private and identifying information, also known as doxing, about the owner of a Twitter account called Libs of TikTok, supposedly because they had stoked hatred against alphabet people. The account shares videos and social media posts uploaded to public channels that often show teachers in introducing children to sexual content and concepts behind their parents' back. Lorenz linked to the name, address, and employer of the account owner and visited a house that belonged to someone in their family. Ironically, she previously complained about doxing in a TikTok video criticizing reporters who put the full name of a private person in a print. Cameron Barr, the Post's senior managing editor, defended the paper's decision to run the story in a statement amid scathing criticism. "We did not publish or link to any details about her personal life," Barr wrote, but that's not true. The Wayback Machine shows that the Post initially linked to a website containing the owner's name and address and then quietly removed that link before issuing a public statement, which was tweeted by Christine Karate Kelly, the Post's chief communications officer. The change undermines claims by the Post that it did nothing wrong. If that were true, it wouldn't have covertly removed the link. Mr. Brown's project, the hate speech tracker, tracks millions of tweets that an army of so-called anti-fascist trolls use to harass and dox people. It's supported by the Prototype Fund, an Open Knowledge Foundation Germany initiative, which the BMBF funds. The Open Knowledge Foundation also partners on tech initiatives with the National Endowment for Democracy, which is intimately connected to the CIA. Leftists think they're underdogs, but they've got powerful institutions behind them. And Gonzalez points out that Twitter's privacy clause prohibits the use of Twitter data in any way that would be inconsistent with people's reasonable expectations of privacy. Lorenz's source harbors a deep hatred for conservatives and law enforcement specifically. Nice to see Berlin trying out positive, actionable alternatives to "all cops are bastards." Brown commented on graffiti that read "all cops are targets." Last April, he wrote, "Like I have no idea who's going around writing 'dead cops don't kill' everywhere, but I feel safer and happier knowing that they're here." Charming stuff. Lorenz deployed the firepower of Media Matters and the ACLU, whose combined assets and resources are immense, to smear someone in a paper owned by billionaire Jeff Bezos. She used the work of a far-left activist whose vendetta against civilization is subsidized by a foreign government, and who the Post elevated for the same and real reason Lorenz wrote that story. They hate normal Americans. It's impossible to draw any other conclusion from people so upset about parents wanting to protect their children from predation and exploitation. They're doubling down, tripling down. One would have thought that wiser heads might prevail among the progressives, but there are no wise heads there. And here's some amusing speculation. Again, this is from Andrea Whitberg at American Thinker. When a man becomes president, he suddenly gains a new appendage, the Secret Service. Wherever he goes and whatever he does, members of the Secret Service are there keeping an eye on him. And like all bureaucracies, you can be sure that the agents are required to document everything on their watch. That's why it's peculiar that in response to a Freedom of Information request from the New York Post to see documents identifying Joe Biden's visitors during his regular stays in Delaware in 2021, the Secret Service is claiming that it has no records with that information. The New York Post was curious about what goes on at Biden's Wilmington and Rehoboth Beach residences in Delaware because he spent roughly 25% of his first year not in the White House, but at those residences. For that reason, the Post asked for documents recording all visitors during more than a year of Biden's time in office, and that's when the Secret Service provided a bizarre response. The Secret Service FOIA office searched all program offices that were likely to contain potentially responsive records, and no records were located. From the Post's point of view, this bizarre non-response, which is impossible to believe, is a way of hiding the fact that Biden is engaged in some sort of influence peddling, perhaps on matters connected to Hunter Biden's conduct. After all, Hunter was frequently a conduit for this influence peddling when his father was vice president. Documents and photos from a laptop that formerly belonged to Hunter Biden indicate that he introduced his father to business associates from China, Mexico, Russia, and the Ukraine, including at the vice president's residence in Washington. The Post also points out that Biden is known to have conducted official business from Delaware. And there is an old tweet here from 2000, Eric Trump. The salary of a U.S. senator is $174,000 per year. This is Joe Biden's house. Seems legit. This is one of those houses that is so large that it is typically called a compound. And he has two of them. You may have seen recently that Biden was boasting. Another one was empty boast. "Oh, for decades, I was the poorest man in the Senate." Apparently, you got quite rich in a hurry. And how did that happen? Well, Twitter and Facebook decided, and NPR and everybody else decided that this scurrilous New York Post story just before the election, this would have to be suppressed, which is in no way influenced the result of the election. So what does Andrea Whitberg think? I have a different guess. I think the secret visitors making their way to Biden's Delaware homes are doctors who specialize in dementia. My theory is that they're closely monitoring Biden's mental status and are giving him a variety of drugs, enabling him to get his act together for specific events, such as statements to the press, speeches, and official events. The one thing I don't believe is that the Secret Service doesn't have any records at all. They're making notes of everything, but clearly are under strict orders to keep everything on the down low and they are following those orders. Wouldn't it be crazy if those fake DHS agents who are able to gain the confidence of some members of Joe Biden's Secret Service detail know who was in Delaware and have passed the word on to Iran's mullahs? And I'll be going back to the chat shortly, but before I do, we're going to continue with Joseph Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies. Diminishing returns is the subject of this chapter. The reason why intensification in agriculture and resource production follows a pattern of declining marginal productivity is fairly easy to show due to the work of Boserup, Clark, and Haswell and Wilkinson. Simply put, rationally acting human populations will first exploit those resources that yield the best return per unit of effort and still meet the needs of the population. If this is so, then it follows that any change in resource extraction must be in the direction of using resources that are more costly to obtain, process, distribute, and/or market, so that the marginal product of labor and other inputs declines. Thus, hunters and gatherers first exploit foods that are higher in nutritional value and easier to obtain and process than resources that are less favorable for these characteristics. Populations employ labor-conserving, extensive patterns of land use, such as hunting and gathering, prior to labor-consuming intensive patterns, such as agriculture. Among those who practice agriculture, extensive systems such as slash and burn are preferred to intensive ones. Among intensive agriculturalists, lower labor quantities per unit of return are preferred to higher. In other spheres of resource extraction, minerals and energy forms can be ranked in terms of their ease of discovery, extraction, processing, and use. Resources that rank higher in these dimensions will be used before resources that don't. And when these are no longer sufficient, secondary resources will be employed. The shift from wood to coal in England and the United States is a case in point. In the contemporary petroleum industry, the extraction of less readily available deposits by secondary and tertiary recovery techniques yields a product with a substantially higher monetary cost, but no greater energy value. There are, of course, ambiguities in these matters. It would be unwise to assume that human populations always behave with economic rationality, and even when they attempt to, information may not be available to ensure success. Further, people do some things for reasons that are not directly economic, but these activities nonetheless consume resources. Acquisition of distant, costly, and rare prestige goods is a ready example. Such uncertainties are easily answered. Among whatever set of resources a population obtains for whatever reasons, the law of diminishing returns is likely to apply. As demand for a commodity grows, increased production will at some point mean depletion or insufficiency of the least costly sources. At that point, more costly sources must be used with declining marginal returns. For the present purposes, it need not be argued that population growth is the sole driving force behind intensification in resource production. No doubt it often is, as in post-medieval England, but other factors can also create rising commodity demands. Information processing. Why does information processing often show a declining marginal return? Why do investment in education and in research and development result in decreasing productivity? The answers in both spheres are similar. The case of education was touched on earlier. Reiterating in brief, general education, which occurs in the earliest years of life, is the most lasting, widespread value. It is also attained at the lowest comparative cost. Later, more specialized training is considerably costlier. Its benefits may apply only to narrow segments of the society, while its costs are spread throughout the system. It may institutionalize rigidity where flexibility is called for. What is more, the benefits of specialized training are at least partly attributable to the generalized knowledge on which it depends. Axiomatically, then, general knowledge will always yield greater benefits than specialized. A society that can meet its needs through generalized education will obtain greater marginal returns on its investment than a society dependent on specialized training. The situation in research and development is similar. As with education, specialized scientific knowledge depends upon prior general principles. Within a scientific field, early work develops the general parameters of the discipline, the nature of the subject matter, the scope of inquiry, broad research questions, and like matters. Although much of this early work may come to be rejected by later scholars, as shown by Thomas Kuhn in 1962, nevertheless, there is also substantial deviation from it. Thus, the product of early generalized work in a scientific field includes all knowledge derived from later specialized research. And so, again, axiomatically, specialized work can never yield the benefits achieved by earlier generalized research. It is no coincidence that the most famous practitioners historically in each field tend to be persons who were instrumental in developing the field and in establishing its basic outline. No Einsteinian physicist, no Darwinian biologist, and no Marxist social scientist will ever achieve the fame and influence of those masters who revolutionized their fields. Yet science is not completely a cumulative, linear process. Rethinking, reformulation, and outright rejection of earlier work are commonplace. When new schools of thought, what Kuhn calls paradigms, emerge through scientific revolutions, a new generalized groundwork is laid upon which later specialized work is built. The movement from general and most widely applicable to specific and most narrowly focused, which characterizes the history of a scientific field, is duplicated repeatedly in the cycle of revolution, paradigm development, paradigm application, and revolution that Kuhn has noted. Again, the knowledge of greatest lasting benefit comes from the general formulations which initiate a paradigm, while the scientists who accomplish this tend to become more famous than their successors who produce derivative work. Rostow has graphed what he argues is the characteristic marginal product curve of individual branches of science. Rostow projects that marginal productivity will first rise and then decline in each specific field, although he asserts that the marginal product for science as a whole continually rises. Sato and Suzawa argue analogously for technical progress, that is, its production function has the standard neoclassical properties of diminishing returns to R&D expenditures. The decreasing benefits from specialized derivative work, viewed from the perspective of the overall history of science, are acquired at substantially greater cost. The costs to society of early supportive science tend to be minimal. And as Price cogently noted, in many cases, society almost dared scientists to exist. Generally, as in the ancient Mediterranean or medieval Europe, it consisted of little more than the support of individual naturalists or mathematicians and their students, or the support of religious specialists who also performed scientific inquiry. Science today, in contrast, is a costly process involving complex institutions, sophisticated technology, and large interdisciplinary research teams. This costly science certainly produces astonishing results, but these cannot be claimed to be more valuable than the generalized knowledge of earlier, less expensive science. And as impressive, for example, as modern travel technology is, it is hard to argue that it is of greater consequence than the development of the wheel or of watercraft or of the steam engine. As astounding as it is to put human beings on the moon, this is not of greater import than the principles of geometry or the theory of gravity. However valuable may be genetic engineering, the benefits of this complex process must always be attributed in part to the nearly cost-free work of Gregor Mendel. I'll have more from Tainter tomorrow. With regards to Thomas Kuhn, it's long been my belief that his hypothesis that in science, people don't change their minds. New hypotheses are made, and then the scientists in charge don't say, oh, yes, I can see we were wrong about this all along. So yes, this new hypothesis seems to be more correct than what we have been fomenting for years and years and years and years. No, what happens is new ideas, new hypotheses are offered, and the old guard simply dies off. I come to the conclusion that this is in fact a universal principle in all aspects of intellectual life, that the old guard simply dies out and newer ideas take hold. I mean, one can look at the complete collapse for socialism in the West. I mean, obviously the collapse of the Soviet Union has something to do with that. But the venerable old lefties, they just died out very quickly. I mean, you see that with generations. You see that with the World War I generation, the World War II generation, and you're beginning to see it with the boomers. that they will start dying, and then you reach a tipping point where they start dying very quickly and then disappear. And it happened with the veterans of World War One, the veterans of World War Two, and it is beginning to happen. Well, we're well into it with regard to the boomers. There's not going to be many of them around in not that long a period of time. And I suppose their attitudes, when their prejudices will vanish with them. I suppose, there will be a time in history when people aren't going on about the 60s and how wonderful they were. And if you didn't live through it, boy, you really missed something. It's never going to be that good again. Let's take a look at the chat again. Oscar Toe, if anything would make someone find religion, it would be one Medusa look from the demonically crying Lorenz. The weeping journalist, says David the Gnome. There's no weeping in journalism. David the Gnome adds, literally works for a billionaire spook rag. Hello to Yo Mama. In just a few seconds, these fillies can turn into better weeping actresses than Glenn Close, says Oscar Toe. No, she's bad at lying. Many women are very good at lying. It just comes over, or crying. It just comes over them, and suddenly their eyes get all puffy and red, and the tears start flowing down. She had to do that trick where she covers her face with her hands so that people can't see that she's not crying. She makes the appropriate noises. Hello to Brian Frakes. And what is this? Volvodinia? The new name to me. Tom Anderson says, KMG, what do you think about Carlton Coon? I know it's not spelled that way. But you can't post the real word on YouTube because it's a slur or something. LOL. Oh, I know who you're talking about. Yes. The anthropologist. Steve Saylor has written a lot about him. He seems quite sound to me. But then, oh, yes, races. There's no such thing as races. This is an evil construct. Well, how can we have a thing such as racism then if races don't exist? Why do we hear racialized people and the like? Who else do we have here? Jim Smith says that part of Cornell is run by the State University of New York. Oscar Toe says John Oliver looks like a cartoon rat fiend. I thought he was very amusing indeed in Community. Oh, Jim Smith points out that's not the Ivy League part of Cornell. Olbermann graduated from Cornell University's College of Agriculture and Life Sciences in 1979 with a BS in communication. That's about the weakest degree. No, that's hyperbole. There are many weaker degrees, but that is a very weak degree. College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. Did he learn a lot about agriculture there? And what exactly are life sciences? She wasn't women's world champion, but yeah, he touched a piece and then didn't move it. Referring to Gary Kasparov. Tom Anderson says no one showed up to Trudeau's speech at the EU. Why does he think his opinion on anything matters? If Canada didn't border the United States, it would have the presence of, say, Burundi on the world stage, or perhaps Denmark. I don't know. Oscar Toe says, patriotism is good, guys. It is the bravest act to put on the uniform. Soldiers are the best of us. Romney, who didn't serve, nor did any of his hundreds of children. William Hicks says, seem to recall that when Mitt was over in France on his mission for the LDS in the late 60s, couldn't be drafted while he was doing that. Could he? Tulsi Gabbard volunteered. As I've noted before, Mitt Romney spent 2 fruitless years in France, didn't make a single convert. Our media had little fear of Russian propaganda in the Cold War. Makes you think, says Hauper. Denny McDougall says, according to Romney, he once stated he served his country by having his sons work as missionaries for the LDS church. He is really, he's really a despicable man, is Mitt Romney. He was keen on Trump, keen enough to meet with him when he thought he was going to be named Secretary of State or some such, and he didn't get the job, of course. Oh yes, Popcast 88 reminds us that Alec, the party boy king, was played by Macaulay Culkin in the movie Party Monster. And Jim Smith reminds us that Paul Auster is the cousin of the late Lawrence, or Larry Auster, who used to read with great occasional admiration, certainly always interest, even though he sicked his clack on me once and then later forgot all about it. Okay. Conjoined twins. I don't like to talk about that. Seems like tons of street drugs are being cut with fentanyl, says Halper. Yes. Yes, indeed. Never watched Deadwood. I have never watched it either. Apparently, there's a lot of swearing in it because that's what they did out there on the frontier. They just swore, and then they swore some more. I don't know whether we know about that. I just think the assumption is that since everyone swears so volubly today, well, human nature doesn't change or human practice doesn't change. So it must have been like that in the 1870s or 1880s or whatever. Oh, okay. Jeffrey Tambor. Rip Torn and Jeffrey Tambor. Yes, they were both brilliant. Both brilliant indeed. Jeffrey Tambor in the final episode, when he just blows up at Larry and Rip Torn, and you treated me as a clown from the beginning, and it's quite powerful. And then a few minutes later, they're sitting in an empty theater after the final show, and Jeffrey Tambor, he comes running up, and he's in tears and says he's so sorry. That's a tremendous show. And I don't know, I think if people want to get in showbiz, I want to get in show business. I want millions of people watching me 4 or 5 nights a week. I mean, show them this show, and maybe that's not such a good idea. Okay. Because people in this position are typically monsters of egotism and also of insecurity. So, let's talk about the evil alliance between the deep state and the media. Well, essentially the same thing now. This is from Glenn Greenwald's Substack. Former intelligence officials citing Russia say that the big tech monopoly power is vital to national security. A group of former intelligence and national security officials Monday issued a jointly signed letter warning that pending legislative attempts to restrict or break up the power of big tech monopolies, Facebook, Google, and Amazon, would jeopardize national security because they argue their centralized censorship power is crucial to advancing U.S. foreign policy. The majority of this letter is devoted to repeatedly invoking the grave threat allegedly posed to the United States by Russia, as illustrated by the invasion of the Ukraine, and it repeatedly points to the dangers of Putin and the Kremlin to justify the need to preserve big tech's power in its maximalist form. Any attempts to restrict big tech's monopolistic power would therefore undermine the U.S. fight against Moscow. Oh, yes. Former intelligence and national security officials, the same group. How many of it was there? 51 of them produced this letter that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. Well, that was blown out of the water. Did any of them apologize for that? No. But now they are back. Greenwald continues, well, one of their central claims is that big tech monopoly power is necessary to combat, i.e. censor, so-called foreign disinformation. Several of these officials are themselves leading disinformation agents, many with the same former intelligence officials who signed the now infamous and debunked pre-election letter, fraudulently claiming that the authentic Hunter Biden emails had the, quote, hallmarks of Russia disinformation. These included former Obama Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, former Obama CIA Director Michael Morrell, former Obama CIA Pentagon Chief Leon Panetta. Others who signed this new letter have strong financial ties to the big tech corporations whose power they are defending in the name of national security, such as Morrell, Panetta, and former Bush National Security Advisor Fran Townsend. The ostensible purpose of the letter is to warn of the national security dangers from two different bipartisan bills, one pending in the Senate, the other in the House, that would prohibit big tech monopolies from using their vertical power to discriminate against competitors, the way Google, for instance, uses its search engine business to bury the videos of competitors to its YouTube property, such as Rumble, or the way Google and Apple use their stores and Amazon uses its domination over hosting services to destroy competitors. One bill in the Senate is co-sponsored by Senator Amy Klobuchar, and a Democrat of Minnesota, and Senator Charles Grassley, Republican of Iowa, and has attracted ample support in both parties, as has a similar House bill co-sponsored by House Antitrust Committee Chair David Cicilline, Democrat of Rhode Island, and Ranking Member Representative Ken Buck, Republican of Colorado. The amount of bipartisan support each bill has garnered and the widespread animosity toward big tech reflected by this congressional support has shocked Google, Amazon, Apple, and Facebook lobbyists who are accustomed to getting their way in Washington with lavish donations to key politicians in each party. This letter by former national security officials is, in one sense, an act of desperation. The bills have received the support of the key committees with jurisdiction over antitrust and big tech. In the Senate, 5 conservative Republican committee members who have been outspoken critics of big tech power, Grassley, Senators Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, and John Kennedy, joined with Democrats to ensure the passage of one bill out of the Judiciary Committee by a 16-6 vote, with a companion bill passing that committee with the support of 20 of 22 senators. The Intercept's Sarah Sirota and Ryan Grimm report both bills have big tech reeling, since a floor vote would likely be a blowout for big tech. Greenwald continues, the extreme animus harbored by large parts of the left and right toward big tech make it very difficult for any lawmaker to go on record in opposition to these proposed bills if they are forced to publicly take a position in a floor vote. Many senators with financial ties to big tech, including the 2 California Senate Democrats who represent Silicon Valley and are recipients of the largesse, Senators Dianne Feinstein and Alex Padilla, have expressed reservations about these reform efforts and have refused to co-sponsor the bill, yet still voted yes when forced to vote in committee. This shows that public pressure to rein in big tech is becoming too large to enable Silicon Valley to force lawmakers to ignore their constituents' wishes with lobbyist donations. These politicians will work behind the scenes to kill efforts to rein in big tech, but will not vote against such efforts if forced to take a public position. As a result, big tech's last hope is to keep the bill from reaching the floor, where senators would be forced to go on record, a goal they hope will be advanced by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer of New York due to his close ties to Silicon Valley. Both of Schumer's children are on the payroll of companies the proposals would seek to rein in, reported the New York Post. Jessica Schumer is a registered lobbyist at Amazon. Allison Schumer works at Facebook as a product marketing manager. Despite that, Schumer claimed to The Intercept that he supports both bills and will vote in favor of them, even though he is engaged in maneuvers to impede the bills from getting a full floor vote. Greenwald continues, this is where these former intelligence and national security officials come in. While these former CIA, Homeland Security, and Pentagon operatives have little sway in the Senate Judiciary and House Antitrust Committees, they command great loyalty from Congressional National Security Committees. Those committees, created to exert oversight of the U.S. intelligence and military agencies, are notoriously captive to the U.S. national security state. The ostensible purpose of this new letter is to insist that big tech monopoly power is vital to U.S. national security because it is necessary for them to censor so-called disinformation from the internet, especially now with the grave Russian threat reflected by the war in the Ukraine, and thus they demand that the anti-big tech bills first be reviewed not only by the Judiciary and Antitrust Committees, but also the National Security Committees, where they yield power and influence, which have traditionally played no role in regulating the technology sector. Why would these former national security and intelligence officials be so devoted to preserving the unfettered power of big tech to control and censor the internet? One obvious explanation is the standard one that always runs Washington. Several of them have a financial interest in serving big tech's agenda. Unsurprisingly, Apple CEO Tim Cook has himself pushed the claim that undermining big tech's power in any way would threaten U.S. national security. And there is now an army of well-compensated by Silicon Valley former national security officials echoing his message. A well-researched political article from September, headlined 12 Former Security Officials Who Warned Against Antitrust Crackdown Have Tech Ties, detailed how many of these former officials who invoke national security claims to protest big tech are on the take from the key tech monopolies. 7 of the 12, including Panetta, hold roles at Beacon Global Strategies, a public relations firm that, according to a person familiar with the matter, counts Google as a client. 5 of the officials, including former director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, Robert Cardillo, and former National Security Agency Deputy Director, Richard Leggett, serve as advisory board members at Beacon. Panetta and Michael Morrell, a former acting CIA director under President Obama, are senior counselors for the firm. Francis Townsend, who was a counterterrorism and homeland security advisor to President George W. Bush, is on the National Security Advisory Board for American Edge, a Facebook-funded group that opposes changes to strengthen antitrust laws. Townsend is also on the board of directors of the Atlantic Council, which counts Facebook and Google as funders, the board of trustees for Center for Strategic and International Studies, which counts Apple and Google as funders, and the board of directors of the Council on Foreign Relations, which receives money from Microsoft and counts Facebook and Google in its highest membership category. Greenwald argues that the view that preservation of big tech is vital for national security is by no means a unanimous view, even in that world. Retired General Wesley Clark and others have vehemently argued that this claim is a myth. As veteran internet security expert Brian Schneier observed, these bills will encourage competition, prevent monopolist extortion, and guarantee users a new right to digital self-determination. But the national security state has enough true believers, combined with paid shills, to make it appear as if Americans should be desperate to preserve and protect big tech's power, because this power is crucial to keeping America safe, and particularly fighting Russia. I will point out, of course, one would think that this was Otios, but America is not, in fact, at war with Russia. Neither is Canada, neither is Britain, neither is France. But for some reason, Russia is now more of a threat than the previous Soviet Union was. The Soviet Union, which was publicly dedicated to conquering the entire world. But now we hear these hilarious stories about how, after swallowing up little Russia, Putin intends to march his army to the shores of the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, anyone who makes this claim should be immediately disqualified from public life, should be laughed out of polite society. But of course, that's not how the world works, because money, big money, can buy a lot of liars. This is from Kane at Citizen Free Press. Elon Musk raises bid for Twitter to $46 billion, a $3.5 billion increase over his previous offer. In a securities filing, Musk also said that given the lack of a response from Twitter's board, he is now exploring a tender offer to acquire shares of Twitter directly from the shareholders. And of course, the board is going to tell them, no, forget about the profit that you're going to make. Elon Musk is a bad person who is not going to censor enough people. And that's what Twitter is all about. Even though, if you recall, we first heard about it during the so-called Arab Spring. And because of you can use Twitter anonymously, this was thought to be tremendously useful in putting together popular opposition to despotic governments. And in fact, it has long been rumored that the CIA was involved in the founding of Twitter. And let's talk about what creeps journalists are again. Steve Saylor writes, there's a big brouhaha over a Washington Post article by Taylor Lorenz revealing the identity of the obscure lady who runs the popular Twitter account Lives of TikTok. Apparently, people sent her links to the most fashionably demented videos people post to TikTok, and she creates an entertaining selection. Printing her name and linking to her address in the Washington Post add nothing to the story, but are effective pour encourager les autres. If you were thinking about having a pro-Republican anonymous social media account where you post true stuff, remember what Jeff Bezos' newspaper did to this other person who tried that. Meanwhile, another example of doxing is getting less publicity. On Monday, I linked to Justice Sotomayor's dissent, in which she was angry that a white man was allowed to serve on a jury despite his answering truthfully. Sotomayor wrote, prior to trial, prospective members of the jury filled out a questionnaire that included the following questions. 68, do you sometimes personally harbor bias against members of certain races or ethnic groups? 69, do you believe that some races and or ethnic groups tend to be more violent than others? To the first question, number 68, the prospective juror at issue answered no. But to the second question, number 69, he answered yes. He explained that, quote, statistics show more violent crimes are committed by certain races. I believe in statistics, unquote. And Saylor comments that the citizen told the truth made Sotomayor very mad, but at least Sotomayor didn't dox the juror. But Slate and a couple of other publications did. In his article, a racist juror helped send a black man to death row. Why doesn't SCOTUS care? Mark Joseph Stern printed the name of the juror, a completely obscure private citizen. So for the rest of this poor guy's life, his name entered into a search engine will bring up Stern's foaming at the mouth article. There was a story, which may or may not be true, that after a pedophilia scare in Britain, around 2000 or whatever, a pediatrician in that country was hounded and came close to being physically attacked. Gangs came outside this person's house because the people didn't know the difference between a pedophile and a pediatrician. Well, here's a similar story from Hannah Nightingale at the Post Millennial. A woman bearing the same name as the woman behind Libs of TikTok recently blasted Washington Post reporter Taylor Lorenz in the wake of an expose that revealed the name of the woman behind the account, saying she has received harassment with the same similarity. Chaya Raichik is a mother of two living in the United Kingdom and an Instagram influencer. She also bears the same name as the woman behind Libs of TikTok. In the wake of the Washington Post story, Raichik said that she had received harassment online and that people have posted her parents' home address on social media platforms, according to the New York Post. In numerous Instagram stories posted following the release of the article, Raichik insisted that she is not the same woman as the Chaya Raichik behind Libs of TikTok. Anyone else that sends me messages like these, threatening me or spewing vile hatred comments, I will blast you and make sure everyone reports you. This is from the not the Libs of TikTok woman. I tried to make light of this ridiculous situation as best I could, but it's become terrifying for me and my family, Raichik wrote on Instagram. In one post, she included just a few of the messages she has received, including Nazi scum, you're so disgusting, we will find you, evil Trump supporter, and you are effing bigoted trash. Your children should be ashamed of you. Another stated, you are what's wrong with the world. You're vile and disgusting. Your children should be taken away from you and put in a safer home. May you rot in hell. And if anything happens to my family, it is on you. And this is a reference to Taylor Lorenz. This is amusing. Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. YouTuber who said cancel culture was a good thing gets canceled. Ethan Klein was warned by Jordan Peterson that the mob would come for him, and they did. So it turns out, yes, in January 14th of this year, Ethan Klein tweeted, years ago, I interviewed Jordan Peterson before I was very familiar with his policies, but he was an interesting guest who I enjoyed sitting with. But especially now, I can see he's a dangerous gateway to alt-right transphobia and COVID misinfo. I removed both interviews today. Peterson responded by warning Klein that those who engage in cancel culture generally live to regret it, adding the chickens will definitely come home to roost. Well, the chickens have come home to roost. But Klein had said, actually, canceling, as you call it, sometimes is a good experience, as painful as it is. The times when I've received the most flack on things I've said are the times I've learned the most about myself and the world and how to be more mindful and caring of others. Well, he certainly knows that feeling now after a clip of Klein making comments about gay people deemed homophobic by the ever-sensitive alphabet people went viral. The YouTuber lost all his sponsors. I see that Paul Joseph Watson is using the term alphabet people, which I can claim because I had never heard anyone use it before me. A few months ago, Dave Chappelle used it. One person tells another person, someone sees it and repeats it in print or otherwise. I suppose that's how these things take off. A tweet by someone called Keemstar Ethan Klein being homophobic for 7 minutes. And I watched about 2 minutes of this. And what he is talking about and laughing about is the, let's say, the physical burdens. I don't want to be more explicit than that because it is so disgusting and distressing. But the physical burdens, shall we say, of male homosexual behavior. And it's all true, of course, but one is not supposed to talk about it. During a show earlier this week, Klein complained, today we have no sponsors because our wonderful fans have taken it upon themselves to write all our sponsors and have them cancel us, not to support us. Yes, homosexuals are just the best people on earth. Let's not talk about what they do, because it will genuinely freak people out. I touched on this yesterday. This is from Brandon Gillespie at Fox News. MSNBC analyst claims Jesus Christ would be called a groomer if alive today. And I'm looking at the hideous face of Matthew Dowd. I did not get the complete interview. Just the, here's more of it, okay? This is something that I tried to talk about, being a Christian, having grown up Catholic, having been an altar boy and all of that, how the faith has been captured by a small segment of our society who've tried to define it in a way that Jesus never had defined it, and actually the opposite way of Jesus. The entire message of the Gospels of the Easter holidays was love one another. Love God first. That's the first commandment. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. If Jesus Christ was alive today, he would be called a groomer, he would be called woke, and he would be called a socialist if he was alive today. Okay. If he was speaking the message that he spoke in the Gospels today about treating everybody with dignity, Jesus Christ hung around with prostitutes and tax collectors. He was nailed to a cross because he spoke on behalf of the most marginalized people in the Middle East. Does Matthew Dowd actually believe that this is true? What did he say to the prostitute? Go and sin no more. Sounds very judgmental, does it? Did Jesus Christ respect the money lenders in the temple? No, he overturned their tables, and scourged them with a whip. He was not nailed to a cross because he spoke on behalf of the most marginalized people in the Middle East. No, he was nailed to a cross because he scandalized the Sanhedrin by his belief that he was, in fact, the Son of God. That's why Jesus Christ was crucified. But Matthew Dowd is going to pretend otherwise. And he's going to be acclaimed. And he is claimed all over the place, not just by the revolting Nicole Wallace of MSNBC, but by all the good people on Twitter. And, Stephen Colbert, yes, I've already talked about that. Let's move on to Canada. Volt. This is from Roberto Wakewell Cruz at the Post Millennial. And this happened, 10 days ago? And I didn't notice it because I go to National News Watch for my digested Canadian news. And I suppose that even though this is a big story, they are not going to include that because reasons. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau took questions at a press conference Monday. He said that his government's immigration policies have been a key contributor to Canada's housing crisis. Population growth in this country hasn't been matched by an equivalent growth in housing supply, said Trudeau in British Columbia. Recent statements by the Prime Minister indicate that there will be no reduction in immigration targets. However, the Trudeau Liberals intend on adding 400,000 new residents in 2022 alone. Trudeau told reporters in Hamilton that the pandemic slowed immigration, despite Canada actually setting a record of 401,000 new permanent residents coming to Canada last year. And permanent residence does not include all of the people who come to Canada. That number is about 600,000 higher. Temporary workers, nannies, and the like, who are supposed to go home, but a great many of them do not. And it is very difficult, close to impossible, to deport people from Canada. Trudeau said, 2 years almost in which Canada has closed its borders because of COVID-19 created challenges and backlogs and delays in getting in the labor force that we need, getting in the new Canadians that we need to build the future. Let's not train Canadians. Let's just make sure that they don't get jobs by just bringing in an ocean of foreigners to take those jobs. The Department of Immigration is working incredibly hard with some of the most ambitious targets Canada's ever seen, of 400,000 new Canadians to be coming in this year. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland has made similar statements to the one Trudeau made Monday. While taking questions at a press conference on affordable housing, Freeland said the most fundamental fact is our population is growing faster than our supply of housing. It's just a problem of numbers and of math. As a country, we want to be a growing country, and it's great that we are a growing country. Yes, the growth for its own sake, the ideology of the cancer cell, as Edward Abbey famously said. It's all numbers to these people. Canada must be a better country than, say, Denmark or Sweden or Norway, because we have more people than those countries. On the other hand, in terms of 38 million, Canada does not rate very highly in terms of total population. So by that measure, Canada is not really a great country. If we're just going to go by numbers. Maxime Bernier, who is a former MP, former cabinet minister, ran second, well, kind of not really, in a leadership race that he lost to Andrew Scheer. He got more votes, a lot more votes. But, PR. And, oh, yes, we're going to rank 13 candidates. Well, he lost. There was only one ballot. He started his own party, the People's Party of Canada. Recent polls have shown that party with anywhere from, 5 to 10% of popular support. Maxime Bernier tweeted, after Freeland, Trudeau admits that high population growth with immigration is partly responsible for the exploding price of housing, but he wants still more mass migration, with the numbers increasing from 250K when he was elected to 450K next year. Augustus Benley responded, in the past few days, I've seen Trudeau admit the role of immigration in the housing crisis. I say admit, but come to realize is probably more appropriate. He's so dumb, he didn't actually believe mass immigration would cause a housing crisis. And I responded to Maxime Bernier, and Pierre Poilievre has no problem with that. His problem is that some Canadians still have decent jobs, so he wants to bribe provincial governments to have them replaced with foreigners. Pierre Poilievre, who was described as the front runner of the leadership campaign, although people have no way of knowing who is the front runner. They simply don't. It's not like delegates could be counted. Poilievre has had a fairly large number of people come to his rallies, but that is not how leaders are chosen. How leaders are chosen by putting together, creating, often out of thin air, the largest instant phantom army of ethnic minorities, led by the Sikhs. Don Martin writes in CTV News, in the heart of liberal-owned Toronto, an unlikely conservative rock star takes the stage. Yes, overflowing rooms, even in, well, this is at a pub, actually, even in Toronto, where the Liberals hold 25 of 25 seats. Poilievre, according to Martin, is a face 9 Canadians out of 10 still couldn't pick out of a two-person lineup. I believe that is true. For what it's worth, with apologies to Buffalo Springfield, there's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear. Nice to stay topical, Don. So he has some criticism of this phenomenon. He vows to knock away bureaucratic gatekeepers to allow foreign professionals to establish here. Not exactly the sort of policy true blue conservatives have been pushing to implement. And then there's his housing promise to cut through red tape, holding back construction to unleash a building boom. A couple of problems with that. Housing approvals are mostly a jurisdiction of municipalities, albeit under provincial control. How a federal government could reach through the provincial maze to cut red tape in city planning departments is a mission improbable, even if it uses housing grants to induce them to act. There's another problem with that as well. In my lifetime, I've seen, the coastal British Columbia from, say, Squamish, just south of Whistler, all the way down to the United States border has been paved over. Housing. Is there going to be any green space left? Or are we doomed to become Hong Kong? And Pierre Poilievre would seem to, yes, of course, Hong Kong. Everyone loves Hong Kong, right? It must be a gas to live in Hong Kong, right? Martin continues, besides, the housing construction industry is already working to capacity. So unless a Poilievre as prime minister could produce thousands of provincially trained carpenters, plumbers, and electricians overnight, there's no way to create a supply boosting building boom. Yes. But Pierre Poilievre, I don't know, he whips up the nerds, the nerds love him. He engages in stereotypical nerd behavior. And I don't know that it is nerds that drive politics in this country. Rex Murphy had written, Pierre Poilievre draws, here we go again, rock star crowds of people tired of Trudeau. And I wrote, for a similar reason, Pierre Poilievre is Justin's nerd doppelganger. Crypto, water pipe, free enterprise. Cringe, all of it. This is what's important. Pierre Poilievre wants Canadians replaced by foreigners as quickly as possible. He is a proudly rootless man and a carpet bagger. Let's take a final look at the chat. Dividend Gnome says, I don't even know what to make of the Pope. Well, one thing is that there is no barrier between any thought, however fatuous, that comes into his head and him uttering it, preferably in the presence of reporters, preferably in the presence of, atheist reporters. And they love him. Will ghost cities ever come to America? Asked a true Greenberg. Tom Anderson says, let's turn the planet into one giant Kowloon walled city. I'm reading this again, and the Pope says the whipping was not violent, or else Jesus would have been arrested, says Oscar Toe. The Pope has actually said that Jesus Christ committed sin, which is a rank heresy. But he has his personal magisterium, as we know. So if the Pope decides to overturn, over 2,000 years, this is modern times, right? Everybody's a sinner. Yeah, but the Christian religion is based on the fact that he was not. He was in fact the Son of God. When I think of the Jesuit menace at the White House, I wonder whether he believes in any of it, and I think that he does not. David the Gnome says, I've been seeing a lot of news about fires destroying food processing facilities lately to go along with all the other fertilizer and shipping gas problems, inflation, etc. Tom Anderson says, but I guess when you actively hate your population, Sam Hyde quote, always relevant, then you take a great deal of pride and joy in making people suffer. And, former Avon lady. That's a new one to me. Quote, available data on Moderna COVID-19 vaccine administered to pregnant women are insufficient to inform vaccine-associated risks in pregnancy, unquote. That is from Moderna itself. Huh. I'm not surprised. Okay. That's it for today. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all so much for tuning in. It's so greatly appreciated. If you would like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations may be made directly to this live stream via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.